What's up, meme team? Welcome to the channel. I'm sitting here with Inspiring Philosophy. He has a YouTube channel. You guys go check it out. I'll put a link down below. And we were just having a conversation talking about skeptics and atheist strategies and tactics that they use that we see that are held commonly kind of across the atheist community. Now, Inspiring Philosophy, you actually just had a debate with Matt Dillahunty, who's a popular skeptic and atheist. What are some of the tactics and the strategies that you noticed when talking with him?
Well, the one thing people need to remember is if you're going to debate an atheist, a lot of times we're talking different languages. Their main goal is to just be skeptical of everything and question everything, never make an actual inference, never put forward an explanation. So when Matt Dillahunty debated Braxton Hunter, I watched in preparation for my debate with him. Braxton just went flat out and said, "Are you offering an alternative to the resurrection?" And he flat out said no. So this is not an exchange of different ideas. Who's got the better worldview with skeptics? Skeptics don't want to put forward their own worldview because they claim they don't really have one as concrete as like a theist would say. Like we would say Christianity is true. It's the best explanation of reality. It explains most of the evidence. Skeptics are going to deny that.
And how does this kind of contrast with skepticism historically, right? Like skepticism used to be a mechanism that people would use in order to discover truth so that way they can formulate a worldview.
They've taken skepticism from this tool that you and I would use to sort of like refine our own beliefs to basically the end point of their worldview. So to us, skepticism is like a hammer. We chisel off, like if we're building a statue, we use it to sort of like chisel off some parts that need to be cut off kind of thing. For them, they just want to go around hammering statues, breaking them down, everything. So we're doing different languages. You and I are trying to chisel this perfect worldview that best explains the evidence. Skeptics are just taking their hammer, going around smashing statues and saying, see, it's incoherent. So the way you handle that is you don't give them that time of the day. When they say they're not convinced, this is one of Matt Dillahunty's favorite lines, well, I'm just not convinced. Well, I don't know. The best response to that is just to say, well, that works for you. You can believe whatever you want. I choose to follow the evidence and follow it to the best explanation. That basically makes your own explanation immune to their criticism because they sort of set themselves up as the arbiter of truth. Yeah. I'm not convinced. And a lot of theists, when they debate Matt Dillahunty or other skeptics, is they fall into that. Oh, you're not convinced. Let me try to convince you. Don't try to convince them. Don't. They're never going to be convinced. Simply point to the audience. Well, look, I offered the best explanation. My opponent has not. So let's follow the evidence where it leads.
Yeah, and there's something interesting about this too, is because when people are just acting as if skepticism is just a thing within itself, like it's not a tool, it's just like a great good within itself, just to be skeptical of everything, then if all you have is skepticism, you're not getting to the truth, right? And skeptics are really afraid a lot of the times to actually make claims because they don't want to defend the claims, right?
Exactly. They don't want to defend any claims, no.
That's right. And so it comes across as just an attempt to avoid a burden of proof, you know what I mean? A lot of times because they don't want to make claims. What I would love to see is a lot of these skeptics who pride themselves on, on being skeptical and these sort of things, offer an alternative explanation. Because if you're not offering an alternate explanation, then what are you really doing? You know what I mean? At that point, it's not really helpful at that point. If you want to make the world a better place, you don't just poke holes in everything. You actually should provide a worldview, or provide an explanation of the facts.
Well, that's a good point. When we go into these debates thinking it's a battle of worldviews, it's the Christian worldview versus the atheist worldview. The skeptic doesn't go into the debate thinking that. They go in thinking, this is we're putting the Christian worldview on trial, and I'm just going to poke holes in it. That's why when Christians get into these debates, to the atheist audience, they look like they do terrible because we're just speaking different languages.
That's right. And that's what's funny about it is because you'll see like a lot of these same skeptics will criticize like intelligent design because they're like, well, they're not really offering anything, even though that's not true. But they say they're not offering anything. They're just poking holes in evolution, right? But let's just say that the worldview or this intelligent design movement, all they did was just poke holes in evolution, and they never try to offer another alternate explanation. And then they would claim victory. So every time you show evidence, they're like, that's not evidence, or I'm not convinced. You know what I mean? All this. What would be the benefit of that? You know what I mean? Because that's exactly what it looks like from our end. What do you say?
Oh, exactly. I mean, anytime they try not to make any positive claims. Like one of my favorite parts of my debate with Matt Dillahunty was at one point he says, I don't know, and you don't know either. And all I had to say was, well, how do you know I don't know?
Yeah.
And his only reply is, well, I don't know. Okay, then everything you just said is meaningless because you said that you know that I don't know, but then you just admit it. You don't know that if I don't know. It's all pointless. You're all just sort of trying to poke holes in something, but you're not really offering anything to replace it.
That's right.
And this is how science works. Scientists don't go around just poking holes in it. They say, your theory is incoherent. Mine is a better explanation.
That's right.
But when we debate these skeptics on God's existence or on a philosophical position, they don't want to take a position. They just want to say yours is not the right one. And they'll just throw out these little, little chisel little arguments there to try to show that.
That's right. And that's why you won't see skeptics offering explanations for the historical facts of the resurrection, right? Like, I hardly ever see that, And the reason why is because if you compare these two different hypotheses to each other, and then you compare them and then you say which one better explains the evidence, you look at the explanatory power, explanatory scope, and all these different historical criterion, then you're just like, well, clearly the resurrection or the Christian worldview makes better sense of these facts. So that's one thing that you'll notice a lot with these skeptics is that they will avoid that burden of proof. So that way it has the illusion from the outside that their case is actually a lot stronger than it is. But as anybody knows, like, you can be hyper skeptical about anything. I could just say, so I thought about this, though, really. You can be hyper skeptical about anything. Just say, I'm not convinced, you know what I mean? Or you can just be, how do you know that? Well, that fact's not, what about this possible explanation? Even though it's not probable at all, right? It's about this possible explanation. And then just like when it comes to stuff that you can't refute, you can just say, well, I'm not personally convinced, you know what I mean? Because nobody has access to try to get in there to be able to look at it objectively. So those are some of the things that I see. Anything else you want to add to that?
Oh, I would just say there's a debate between Paulo Gia and Mike Winger on the resurrection. And all Paulo Gia does in the debate is he just says, well, maybe Peter had an hallucination, or maybe there was some sort of group hysteria. He's just throwing out about all these possibilities that could be the case. Whereas Mike was saying, this is the most probable. A lot of times in these debates, the theist is saying probability, whereas the skeptic is just saying, but possibility. Yeah. Again, speaking different languages. And Mike did a pretty good job of saying, well, that doesn't really challenge my case just because there are other possibilities. Right. It's not a question of possibility, it's a question of probability.
That's right. And it doesn't matter how fringe or even in, I'm sure you see this in quantum mechanics or something like that, right? They say, oh, there's this fringe theory that hasn't had any like establishment when it comes to the, the evidence or anything like that. But because this is even possible, or it's just one thing, therefore we can't know anything, right? Oh, yeah. It's like if we don't know everything, to them they'll say that's the equivalent of us not knowing anything when it comes to some of these things, in order to avoid, the facts.
And I was so ready for that in that debate with Matt Dillahunty for him to try, like, well, what about many worlds interpretation, or there's something called quantum Darwinism or consistent histories. And I had on my iPad a list of objections to all of those ready to go. So a lot of times it's good to go into these debates, prepare more than you think you're going to need. 70% of the stuff I prepare for, I end up never using in debates because I want to be over-prepared just in case.
That's right. You recently also debated Aron Ra. What was some of the tactics that he kind of used in there? Is there something that kind of sticks out in your mind?
His main argument was more anecdotal evidence. Like, I heard about this one guy who was a Christian and he did this bad thing. Therefore, Christianity caused it. It was a correlation causation fallacy. In the cross-examination, he was just sort of assuming that, well, Christianity already is known to be false, so why would it be beneficial to believe something that's false? And I was pointing out, you're basically begging the question against Christianity, and that's not the debate tonight. And he just confused so many basic concepts, like the difference between what's pragmatic and what's true, what the difference between, correlations and causations. It was a whole mess, and it was hard to dissect it all in the time I had. But, ultimately, I feel like I felt really good after the debate anyway. So
what is one of the things that, one of the tactics that, or I'll put it this way, why do you think that Aron Ra seems persuasive to his fans?
He is a charismatic atheist preacher. He really resonates with them and how they feel growing up about how religion is harmful or how it comes across as stupid to them. So he can be a voice for them. The problem is that he can give a really good sermon, but when he's not talking about the theory of evolution and he's talking about utility of religion or the history behind the Bible, he's really not an expert. And so if you're going to debate him on evolution, good luck, because he knows a lot with regards to that. I mean, he knows the names of species throughout the Cambrian explosion off the top of his head kind of thing. But if he steps out of that field, there's a lot of data he just doesn't know, but he can throw out a lot of anecdotal evidence to make it sound like he knows what he's talking about. And the way I handled that was just going right to the science. Well, here's what the real studies say. So it doesn't matter what anecdotes you can throw out there.
No, that's good. And one thing I noticed about Aron Ra is that because I do memes, right? Like that's kind of my thing. Aron Ra is like a personification of a million memes. It's like he has them committed to memory. Like really, that you can take each individual sentence he says and make a meme out of it, you know? And these things probably sound, because it's rhetorical, right? And they have a feeling of commonsensicalness or something like that, right? That's not a word, but it sound commonsensical, right? Or something like that. They appeal to this kind of rhetorical intuition of some sort. But when you start dissecting any of these things, it's just ridiculous, you know what I mean? But that's why I think in today we're kind of in a soundbite culture where people cling on to these sound bites that are attached with these type of infuriating emotions or negative emotions, or even you can use like comedy or whatever, you know what I mean? And then those are the things that actually sound more persuasive to people, as opposed to careful evaluation of actually what's being said. It's the connotation and the feelings behind what's being said rather than the content of what's being said.
Yeah, and I had an atheist tell me after my debate with Aron Ra that he thought I came across like the scientist and Aron Ra came across as like the preacher.
Right.
And I mean, quite honestly, go back and watch the debate. He gives a fiery sermon his first 30 minutes. And then I get up there and I just study after study after study. Yeah. And, you know, you just got to look at that and go, well, one of them is just giving anecdotal evidence. One is is using a lot of papers. Aron, I think, brought up maybe 2 or 3 papers. And I knew the ones he had actually brought up because I looked them up beforehand.
Yeah.
So, you got to follow the evidence, and a lot of fans of these people, they hear those emotional things that feel them, and they go on their intuition when it comes to that, not on the data, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I think that they feel like they could relate to, because one thing I think too is when, to be fair, because it seems like a lot of atheists, at least I encounter, I'm not sure if it's like this on the other side, but a lot of the atheists that I encounter seem to just distrust everything Christians say, right? Their favorite word is dishonest. Yep. You know what I mean? Which drives me nuts. Like, oh, you're so dishonest. You're dishonest. These guys are all dishonest. Apologists are dishonest. Yep. And the one thing I'd say, probably to be fair, is that they probably feel like they were misled by Christians in the past, so they assume that like, everything they say is just like intentionally dishonest. But it's just such a ridiculous ploy to me, just because I don't assume dishonestly initially. I assume that they're either wrong or biased, or there's all kinds of different explanations for why they'd say what they would say. But to just assume everybody that disagrees with you is dishonest is so incredibly convenient in order to maintain a false sense of peace within your worldview that could be possibly discomforting, that it's just insane.
Well, go look at the comments under my debate with Matt Dillahunty. I read through them and I felt more confident in my arguments than ever. Yeah. Because the majority of the comments were just saying, well, he's not an expert, or he doesn't know what he's talking about. These are just like one-line zingers, but they don't really deal with the data. I saw very few comments of people trying to offer arguments against my actual position, which I've already dealt with on my channel extensively. Yeah. But they're just trying to give the impression that I don't know what I'm talking about without actually giving you any reason. So I come away from the comments with the exact opposite effect of what a lot of those atheists wanted me to have, which is that I didn't know what I was talking about. But I was able to look at their comments and go, they're just hand waving. They're not offering anything. They're just saying, I don't know what I'm talking about, but they can't actually show it for some reason.
And what would you say to somebody that says, oh yeah, you're not an expert, so therefore essentially you're wrong, right? Or you don't know what you're talking about? What would you say? 9
times out of 10, they're not an expert either. So how can they know I'm not? How do they know I'm not? If they're not an expert either, they can't say I don't know what I'm talking about by their own standard. Yeah. If they are an expert, I would say, please show me how I'm wrong. Yep. And sometimes they can't, or they'll give me some sort of runaround. It's unfortunate. I've seen it happen 1,000 times.
Yeah, and that's why people seem to think too. And this is what's funny about it is I noticed that, and this is human nature. I don't think this is just specific to the atheists, but people will like, disagree with science or whatever when it doesn't suit with their worldview, and then whenever it does go with their worldview, they're all for science, right? But I see atheists like all the time. Even in the past, I would talk with atheists about like the facts of the of the fine tuning of the universe, right? And they'll just flat out deny that like any of these things are facts. So I was like, wait, I thought you were pro science, right? You know what I mean? And then they just throw it out the window in a second to preserve whatever they're trying to reject, And so there's that bias there. But I think it's the same thing a lot of the times where it comes to a lot of these discussions, is because these people say they're all about science, right? And then you have this scientific discussion with an atheist, and all of a sudden they're just like, don't even care about the scientific facts, right? They're not thinking about the facts, not trying to see if you're right or wrong. Instead, all they're doing is just rejecting on principle.
Right, and that's what happened in my debate last year with a guy named Tom Jump, is that he just said you're wrong a bunch of times. You're wrong, because the physics says you're wrong. And like, what do you do to that? Okay, well, you're not explaining how or why, so I'm not sure where to go from here.
Yeah. you recently also, I mean, in that discussion you had with Tom Jump too, you that kind of boiled down to more epistemology, right? And do you find that a lot of atheists hold a similar epistemology, or is that kind of similar to just kind of his kind of style or what he was trying to do? Or
No, I see a lot of that kind of neo-Humean type of reasoning from him, or it's very similar. It's like they talk about what I mentioned earlier. It's that we have a hammer to chisel our statue to get it perfect. Their idea is their hammer is to go around knocking over other statues. Yeah. It's very similar in how they approach these type of arguments, and they don't want to reason to the best explanation. They don't think we should when it's convenient to their position. So they'll just say, well, you can't do that here. But watch what they do when it comes to evolution. This is why I kept bringing up evolution as an example in my debate with Matt Dillahunty, because I was saying, look, when you reason evolution, you're using the exact same tactics I'm using now to reason to the existence of God. Inference to the best explanation.
Yep. And then, the rules suddenly change too.
Every time.
Yep. And so, I think that was one of the things too I noticed with a lot of these skeptics is that because it's just skepticism or being skeptical, they don't have a consistent epistemology of what they're actually skeptical on, or a process to how you derive to this skepticism and all. It's always kind of changes to suit their needs, So I guess the next time that you run into these skeptics and these atheists that are kind of using these same sort of tactics, what are you going to say?
What do you mean?